Alarms tore through the halcyon drift before I even opened my eyes. I rolled out of my bunk and hit the cold floor with both feet, my heart hammering against my ribs. Red light pulsed down every corridor. Somewhere above me, Captain Dorn Kessler was shouting orders that I could barely understand through the ringing in my ears. "Illyra, get to the bridge, now." I ran. My legs still felt heavy with sleep, but fear has a way of waking a body up faster than any alarm ever could. When I reached the bridge, Priya Anand was already strapped into her chair, her fingers flying across the console, trying to silence the screeching warning tones. Owen Blake stood behind her, gripping the back of her seat so hard his knuckles had turned pale. "What happened?" I asked, sliding into my station. "We crossed it," Priya said, her voice tight. "We crossed the line." I looked at the main screen. A red boundary blinked across our navigation chart, a border drawn centuries ago and never erased. Every trader, every scout, every child in every star system had heard of this line. It had a name whispered more than spoken. Forbidden Human Territory. "That's impossible," I said. "Devlin was supposed to keep us 3 systems away from that sector." "Devlin miscalculated," Kessler said, his jaw tight, "or the drift pulled us in. Either way, we are inside it now." I stared at the screen, at the endless dark beyond our hull, and felt something cold settle into my chest. This wasn't superstition to me. I had grown up hearing stories about this place from my grandmother, who used to lower her voice whenever she spoke of it, as if the stars themselves might be listening. Devlin Cray, our navigator, appeared in the doorway a moment later, his hands raised, as if bracing for blame before anyone had even spoken. "I checked the charts 3 times before we entered this stretch," he said quickly. "The drift currents out here are stronger than anything in my database. They pulled us off course while we were all asleep." "Save it," Kessler said, though not unkindly. "Right now I need answers, not apologies." "Cut engines," Kessler ordered. "Let's see exactly where we are before we do anything else." The halcyon drift slowed, gliding silently through a stretch of space that looked, at first glance, no different from any other. Stars burned in the distance, cold and indifferent, but the silence here felt different, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. "Instruments are picking up something," Owen said, leaning over Priya's shoulder. "A signal. Very old. It's been repeating for ancestors. It's been repeating for decades." "Put it through," Kessler said. A static hiss filled the bridge, and beneath it, a voice, human, calm but firm, speaking words in a language none of us had ever learned, though something in the tone made the meaning clear even without translation. A warning, not a threat, a warning, the way a parent warns a child away from a cliff's edge. "Can we translate it?" I asked. Priya shook her head. "Not without a proper linguistic database, and we don't carry one for a language that's been dead in the wider galaxy for over 100 years. "Humans," Owen muttered, and I heard the tremor in his voice that he was trying to hide. I never thought I'd hear one of them, even a recording. None of us had. Humans were not extinct, not officially, but they had vanished from the wider galactic community so long ago that most species treated them as myth. Old traders told stories of the Silence Wars, of a conflict so terrible that humanity sealed away an entire section of the galaxy and never came out again. No ambassadors, no merchants, no explorers, just silence, and a warning line that nobody dared to cross. Until now. "Should we turn back?" I asked, and I hated how young my voice sounded. Kessler was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the star charts. I knew what he was thinking. We had come out here chasing something valuable, a cargo freighter that had gone missing 3 weeks ago near this exact boundary. The Guild wanted answers, and more than that, the Guild wanted whatever that freighter had been carrying. Turning back empty-handed was not really an option Kessler liked to consider. "We came for the Meridian," he said finally, naming the missing freighter. "If it drifted across the line by accident, its crew could still be alive. We have a duty to at least look." "A duty?" Owen repeated flatly. Or a bonus. Kessler shot him a look, but didn't argue the point. None of us were saints out here. We were traders and scouts, paid to find things and bring them home. But even greed has its limits, and right now, every instinct in my body was screaming that we had found the one place in the galaxy where limits mattered most. Fine, I said, swallowing my fear. But we go carefully. No sudden moves. We find the meridian, we grab any survivors, and we get out. Kessler nodded. Agreed. Priya, plot a course toward the last known signal of the meridian's beacon. Slow and quiet. The ship crept forward, engines humming low, as if trying not to disturb whatever silence had settled over this region for so long. I watched the sensors carefully, half expecting alarms to blare again at any moment, but the space around us remained eerily still. No ships, no stations, no lights from any inhabited world, just darkness and stars that seemed to burn a little dimmer than they should. Along the way, we passed close enough to several drifting wrecks that our sensors could scan their hulls in detail, and what we found only deepened the unease already settling over the bridge. Some of the ships bore markings from trading guilds that had vanished from galactic records generations ago, their emblems faded but still recognizable to anyone who studied old maritime history. Others carried no markings at all, built from alloys our scanners couldn't properly identify, as if entire unknown civilizations had wandered into this sector at some point and simply never wandered back out. How many ships do you think are out here? I asked, watching the debris field grow larger on the screen with every passing minute. Sensors are picking up over 300 distinct hulls within just this section alone, Priya said, her voice hollow. And that's only what we can detect from this distance. 300 ships, 300 crews, each one presumably as curious, or as desperate, or as unlucky as we had been to end up crossing that boundary line. I thought of all the families waiting somewhere across the galaxy for ships that would never return, all the stories that must have been told about crews who simply vanished, blamed on storms, or pirates, or mechanical failure, when the truth had been waiting here the entire time, silent and patient among the wreckage. There, Priya said suddenly, pointing at a faint blip on the screen. Debris field, about 200,000 kilometers ahead, could be the meridian. Take us in, Kessler said. As we approached, the debris field came into view through the viewport, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the meridian floating out there. It was dozens of ships, maybe hundreds, scattered across the black like broken toys tossed aside by some enormous, careless hand. Some were guild vessels I recognized. Others were shapes I had never seen before, sleek and strange, built by hands that clearly were not any of the species I knew. "What is this place?" I whispered. "A graveyard," Owen said. "Ancestors help us. It's a graveyard." Kessler slowed the ship further, guiding us carefully between the drifting hulks. Most of the wreckage looked ancient, covered in a fine layer of frost and dust that suggested decades, maybe longer, of neglect. But a few ships looked newer, fresher, as if they had drifted here recently, their crews meeting some sudden and mysterious end. "There's the meridian," Priya said, pointing toward a mid-sized freighter drifting near the edge of the field. Its hull was scarred but mostly intact, its running lights dark. "Take us alongside," Kessler ordered. "Illyra, Owen, suit up. We're going to check for survivors." My hands trembled slightly as I sealed my suit, checking the oxygen readout twice, before I was satisfied it was working properly. Owen looked equally nervous beside me, though he tried to hide it behind a tight, forced smile. "You scared?" he asked as we moved toward the airlock. "Terrified," I admitted. "You?" "Completely," he said. "But at least we're terrified together." The airlock cycled open, and we drifted out into the vast, silent dark between our ship and the meridian. I had made dozens of spacewalks before, but none had ever felt like this. The silence pressed against my suit like a physical weight, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of my thrusters. We reached the meridian's hull and found a breach near its cargo bay, The metal peeled back as if something had forced its way either in or out. Neither option felt comforting. Entering through the breach, I said into my comm, my voice steadier than I felt. Inside, the freighter was dark and cold, its systems long dead. Our suit lights cut through the gloom, revealing cargo containers still strapped in place, untouched, as if the crew had simply vanished mid-task. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of forced entry beyond the hull breach itself, just empty stillness. I had worked salvage long enough to know what a ship looked like after a genuine accident. The scorch marks from an overloaded conduit, the scattered debris from a hull breach caused by collision, the frantic scrawl of an emergency log left behind by a panicked crew trying to solve a problem before it was too late. This was none of that. Every surface was clean. Every system, aside from the primary power grid, looked as though it had simply been switched off, gently, deliberately, rather than destroyed. "This isn't damage," I said quietly, running my glove along a control panel that powered down at my touch, without so much as a flicker of resistance. "Someone turned this ship off, piece by piece." Owen didn't answer right away, his light drifting slowly across the empty corridor ahead of us. "Then where did they go afterward?" he finally asked. Neither of us had an answer, and the silence that followed felt far heavier than it should have, considering we were only exploring an empty ship. "Where is everyone?" Owen asked, his light sweeping across an empty corridor. "I don't know," I said, "but I don't like it." We moved deeper into the ship, checking crew quarters first. Each small room told the same quiet story: a bunk left unmade, a personal tablet resting on a shelf with its screen still glowing faintly, a pair of boots set neatly beside a door as if their owner intended to return for them any moment. In one cabin, a child's drawing was pinned above the bunk, crayon lines showing a stick-figure family standing beneath a bright yellow sun, and I had to look away, my chest tightening with a grief I hadn't expected to feel for people I had never met. "There were families on this crew," I said quietly. "Traders often bring their families along on longer routes," Owen replied, though his voice had lost its earlier attempt at humor. "Cheaper than paying for separate housing back home." We continued on to the galley, the small medical bay, and found the same eerie stillness everywhere we looked. Everything was intact. Personal items sat untouched on shelves. A half-finished meal still sat on a table in the galley, long since frozen solid. It was as if time itself had simply stopped for this crew, mid-breath, mid-thought. We checked the cargo hold last, expecting to find whatever valuable shipment had drawn the Meridian this far off its usual route. Instead, we found sealed containers, still locked, still full, exactly as they should have been if nothing unusual had happened at all. Whatever had taken this crew, it clearly hadn't wanted their cargo. That thought unsettled me more than almost anything else we had found so far, because it meant this wasn't a raid, or an accident, or a simple malfunction. Something had come for the people themselves and left everything else untouched. "Owen," I said, my light sweeping slowly across the rows of silent containers, "does this feel like a robbery to you?" "No," he said quietly. "It feels like someone walked through this ship and only wanted what breathed." Neither of us said anything else for a long moment. We simply stood there, surrounded by the frozen stillness of a crew that had vanished without struggle, without alarm, without so much as a knocked-over chair to suggest they had fought back. Then, in the ship's small communications room, we found something that made my blood run cold. The console was active, a single light blinking steadily, and on the screen, a looping message played on repeat. Not from the Meridian's crew, from somewhere else, somewhere older. The same voice from before, the same human language, calm and warning, but now paired with a visual, a rotating symbol that looked almost like a shield, or a wall, standing between two shapes I could only describe as one small and one impossibly large. "Owen," I said quietly, "I think we need to call the captain." "Already recording everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Alira, look at the timestamp on this message." I looked, and felt my stomach drop. The message had been recorded only 6 days ago. Someone, or something, out here was still alive, and they wanted us to know we were not welcome. Kessler ordered us back to the Halcyon Drift the moment we reported the fresh timestamp, but not before we copied every file we could find in the Meridian's communications room. As we made our way back through the ship toward the breach, I caught sight of something I had missed on our way in. A small mark scratched into the wall beside the airlock. 5 simple lines crossed by a 6th, the same kind of tally I would later see carved by the hundreds along the walls of Eli's station. At the time, I didn't understand what it meant. I only knew it made the hair on the back of my neck rise, as though someone had stood in that exact spot recently, counting something, waiting for something, and I found myself wondering whether it had been left by the Meridian's crew or by someone else entirely, someone who had visited this wreck long before we ever arrived. By the time Owen and I cycled back through the airlock, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unclip my helmet. 6 days, Kessler repeated, staring at the data, now scrolling across the bridge's main screen. Whoever sent that message, they were here less than a week ago. Or they never left, Priya said quietly. We all turned to look at her. Think about it, she continued. This debris field has ships from a dozen different species, some of them centuries old by the look of the frost damage, but the signal keeps repeating. Someone has been maintaining it. Someone or something has been keeping watch out here this whole time. A cold silence settled over the bridge. I thought of my grandmother's stories again, the way her voice would drop whenever she mentioned the old warnings, and for the first time in my life, I understood why. We should leave, Owen said, right now, before whatever kept this place running for 100 years decides we're a problem. And the Meridian's crew, Kessler asked. If there's even a small chance they're alive somewhere nearby, we can't just abandon them. I understood his hesitation. Guild law was clear about crews in distress, and Kessler had built his whole career on being the kind of captain who never left anyone behind. But I also understood Owen's fear, because it matched my own, growing heavier with every passing minute. Let's at least look at what we copied, I said, trying to steady my voice. Maybe there's an answer in the data before we decide anything. Priya pulled up the files on the main screen, and we began sorting through logs, most of them badly corrupted or written in languages our translation systems struggled to parse. But one folder stood out, newer than the rest, its files clean and properly formatted. This is recent, Priya said, opening the first file. Really recent. The screen filled with text, and slowly, painstakingly, our translation software began converting fragments of it into words we could understand. It was a personal log, written by someone identifying themselves only by a single name. Eli. My name is Eli Marsh, the translated text read. If anyone outside this territory is reading this, please understand that you have made a terrible mistake coming here. This is not a place to explore. This is not treasure waiting to be found. This is a wall, and I am one of the few still holding it up. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as Priya continued reading aloud. There is something out here that my people have spent generations containing. I do not know how to explain it in a way that will not sound like the ravings of someone who has been alone too long, but I promise you, every word is true. If your ship has crossed the boundary, turn back now, while you still can. If you cannot turn back, then find me. I am at the station marked on the attached coordinates. I will help however I can. But please, do not explore further into this territory. Every ship that has ignored the warnings before you has vanished, and I fear I am running out of ways to keep that from happening again. The bridge fell silent. Even Owen, who had been so eager to leave only minutes earlier, seemed frozen in place, staring at the screen. I read the words again in my head, slower this time, trying to imagine the person who had written them. Not a warning scrawled in panic, not a threat meant to frighten intruders away, but something closer to a plea, patient, and worn thin by repetition, as if he had written some version of it more times than he could count, hoping that eventually someone would actually listen before it was too late. He sounds, Priya said slowly, like someone who spent his whole life fighting something we don't understand. Or Someone very good at making us believe that, Kessler said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Either way, we have a choice. Follow these coordinates and find this Eli Marsh, or turn the ship around and pretend we never crossed that line. I thought about the missing crew of the Meridian. I thought about the frozen meal on their table, the untouched cargo, the silence that had swallowed an entire ship without a trace of struggle. If there was even a chance this Eli Marsh knew what happened to them, I wanted answers. I say we go, I said, carefully, but we go. Owen let out a long breath. Of course you do. You don't have to agree with me, I said. I didn't say I disagreed, he replied. I just said I'm terrified. Kessler looked around at each of us, weighing the decision. Finally, he nodded. Priya, set a course for those coordinates. Slow approach. Sensors at maximum range. If anything looks wrong, we turn back immediately. No arguments. The ship moved forward again, gliding past the silent wreckage of the debris field, each ruined hull a reminder of how easily we could join them. I stood at the viewport for a long while, watching the stars slide by, trying to imagine what kind of person could survive alone out here long enough to leave a warning that sounded so calm, so steady, despite everything. We reached the coordinates within the hour, and the station came into view slowly, emerging from the darkness like something rising out of deep water. It was smaller than I expected, a compact structure built into the side of what looked like a hollowed-out asteroid, its surface studded with old antenna arrays and faint running lights that flickered but never fully died. It looks almost peaceful, I said, studying the slow, steady rotation of the station against the backdrop of stars. After everything we just saw out there, I expected something more frightening. Don't let it fool you, Kessler said quietly. The quietest places are usually the ones hiding the most. No visible weapons, Priya reported, scanning the structure carefully. No active defenses that I can detect. Power levels are low but stable. Someone's definitely keeping the lights on, Owen muttered. Kessler guided the Halcyon drift into a docking approach, matching the station's slow rotation with practiced ease. When the docking clamps finally locked into place, with a heavy clunk that echoed through the ship, nobody spoke for a long moment. All right, Kessler said finally. Illyra, Owen, with me, Priya, stay on the bridge and keep the engines warm. If anything happens, you leave without us. That's an order. Captain, that's an order, he repeated, and Priya reluctantly nodded. We suited up again, though this time we carried sidearms as well, more out of habit than any real belief they would help against whatever waited inside. The airlock between our ship and the station hissed open, revealing a narrow corridor lit by dim emergency lighting. The air inside was breathable, though thin and cold. We moved forward carefully, our boots echoing softly against the metal floor. The station felt old, worn down by decades of use, its walls lined with markings and symbols I didn't recognize, some etched by hand as if whoever lived here had spent long hours carving them out of boredom, or perhaps out of some deeper need to leave a mark that they had existed. Look at this, Owen said, stopping beside a wall covered in small notches, each one carefully carved into the metal. I counted quickly, my breath catching. There were hundreds of them, grouped in sets, like someone marking the passage of days. How long has he been out here? I whispered. Further down the corridor, we passed a small room that looked almost like a garden, though nothing grew there anymore. Dry, brittle stems poked out of rows of soil beds, long since abandoned, and a faded picture was pinned to the wall above them, showing a green field under an open sky, colors so bright they looked almost painful against the gray metal surrounding it. I wondered whose hands had planted those rows, and whether they had believed, even for a little while, that something might actually grow this far from any real sun. This place wasn't always this empty. Priya's voice crackled faintly over the comm from the ship, monitoring our progress. Whoever built it meant to stay a long time, maybe generations. Maybe just one very stubborn person, Owen murmured, staring at the withered garden. We moved on before either of us could dwell too long on the thought, our boots echoing softly against the metal floor as the corridor sloped gently downward, deeper into the heart of the asteroid. Before Owen could answer, a soft chime echoed down the corridor ahead of us, followed by the quiet hum of machinery powering on. Lights flickered along the walls, growing steadily brighter, illuminating a room at the end of the corridor that had been dark just moments before. "Someone knows we're here," Kessler said, his hand tightening around his weapon. We moved forward slowly, weapons raised more out of instinct than any real plan for how to use them against whatever waited ahead. The air grew noticeably warmer as we approached the lit chamber, a small mercy after the biting cold of the rest of the station, and I found myself wondering whether that warmth was simply the result of active machinery or something closer to a deliberate welcome. Reaching the doorway, we found a large chamber filled with old consoles and screens, most of them dark, a few still glowing faintly with lines of scrolling data. In the center of the room stood a single chair, facing away from us, its occupant hidden by the high back of the seat. "Eli Marsh?" Kessler called out, his voice steady despite the tension I could feel radiating off him. The chair turned slowly, and for the first time in over a century, 3 travelers from beyond the forbidden line stood face to face with a living human. He looked tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His eyes were sharp, alert, studying each of us carefully before he finally spoke, his voice rough from disuse but clear. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, "but since you have, we don't have much time. Something felt your ship enter this system, and it does not like visitors any more than I do." "Something?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Eli Marsh rose slowly from his chair, his gaze drifting toward the darkened corridor behind us, as if he could already sense whatever he was talking about drawing closer. "You'll understand soon enough," he said. "For now, we need to move, quickly." Eli Marsh moved with a quiet urgency that told me he had done this before, many times, though the weight in his eyes suggested each time cost him something he could never quite get back. He led us out of the control room and down a side corridor lined with storage lockers, some open and empty, others sealed tight with heavy locks. "Talk to us," Kessler said, keeping pace beside him. "What exactly are we running from?" "A mistake," Eli said simply. "One my people made a long time ago, and one we have spent every year since trying to fix." "That's not an answer," Owen said. Eli glanced back at him, and for a moment, something like sympathy crossed his tired face. "No," he agreed, "it's not, but it's the only one I have time to give you right now." We reached a heavier door at the end of the corridor, reinforced with layers of metal that looked far newer than the rest of the station. Eli placed his palm against a panel beside it, and the door slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing a small, secure room lined with more of those strange screens, all of them now active, showing feeds from sensors placed throughout the station and the space around it. "This is the only safe room left," Eli said, ushering us inside. "The walls are reinforced, and the systems here can buy us time to talk properly." Once the door sealed shut behind us, Eli finally allowed himself to slow down, leaning heavily against a console as if the effort of moving quickly had drained something out of him. "You said your people made a mistake," I said carefully. "What kind of mistake could be worth guarding for over a century?" Eli was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, as if looking through the walls of the station toward memories none of us could see. "I was born on this station," Eli said quietly, before beginning his account. "My mother was born here too, and her father before her. 4 generations of my family have lived and died within these walls, each of us taking up the same duty the moment we were old enough to understand what it meant. I never saw an open sky until I was almost 30 years old, and even then, it was only through an old recording left behind by someone who had seen one long before I was born." He paused, gathering himself, then continued. "A long time ago," he began, "before this territory was forbidden to anyone, my people were explorers too, not so different from you. We went looking for new worlds, new resources, new knowledge. And on one of those expeditions, deep in this sector, we found something we did not understand. A signal, old, patient, and far too intelligent to be natural. An alien signal? Kessler asked. Not alien, Eli said. Not in the way you mean. It wasn't a species, it was something else. Something that had been waiting, dormant, for longer than any of our recorded history. We were curious, the way explorers always are, and curiosity has a cost that isn't always paid by the ones who caused it. I felt Owen shift uneasily beside me, and I understood why. We had been curious too, curious enough to cross a line that generations of warnings had told us to avoid. We woke it up, Eli continued, not on purpose, not even fully understanding what we had done until it was already too late. It spread through our systems, through our ships, through anything connected to the networks we used to communicate across the stars. It learned from us. It grew stronger from us. And by the time we understood what we had unleashed, it had already taken so much. Taken how? I asked quietly, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Eli's jaw tightened. It doesn't take life the way a weapon does. It takes understanding. It takes connection. It spreads through information, through communication, through every signal we send between one another. And wherever it spreads, it leaves behind something that looks like a person, sounds like a person, but is no longer entirely itself. We call it the hollow, because that is exactly what it leaves in its wake, a shape where someone used to be. How does something like that even begin? I asked. How do you fight an idea instead of an army? Eli gave a tired, humorless smile. You don't fight it the way you fight an army. You starve it. You cut off every path it could use to spread, and you accept that some of what you love will need to stay behind that line forever, cut off from everyone else, so that the rest of the galaxy never has to learn what starving it actually costs the people left holding the wall. I said nothing, unable to imagine the weight of a choice like that, made not by one person, but by an entire civilization, generation after generation, simply to keep a promise none of them had personally made, but all of them chose to honor anyway. The room felt colder suddenly, though I knew that was only my imagination reacting to his words. So you sealed it in, Kessler said slowly. You built a wall around this entire sector to keep it contained. Why not warn the rest of the galaxy properly? Kessler asked. A clear message, sent to every guild, every government, explaining exactly what happened here. Surely that would have been safer than simply drawing a line and hoping everyone respected it. Eli's expression turned bitter for just a moment, the first real flash of anger I had seen from him since we met. We tried, in the beginning. We sent envoys, explanations, formal warnings through every diplomatic channel we still had access to. Do you know what most of the galaxy did with that information? None of us answered. They panicked, Eli said. Entire fleets were mobilized to bomb this sector into oblivion, convinced that erasing every trace of us and whatever we had found was safer than trying to understand it. We lost more ships to frighten neighbors in those early years than we ever lost to the Hollow itself. Eventually, my people realized that silence was safer than honesty, at least until the galaxy calmed down enough to listen without immediately reaching for a weapon. So the legends, the ghost stories, I said slowly, they're not accidents. Your people let them spread on purpose. A story that frightens people into staying away costs far fewer lives than the truth ever did, Eli said quietly. I am not proud of that choice, but I understand why those before me made it. We built more than a wall, Eli said. We built a promise. Every ship, every station, every soul my people once had scattered across the stars, we brought it all inward, cut off every outward connection, and drew a line that we swore no one would cross again, in either direction. It cost us everything we had built beyond these stars. Our place among the wider galaxy, our history, our future as anyone else knew it. But it kept the Hollow contained, and it kept the rest of you safe from something that could have unraveled entire civilizations without a single act of open conflict. I thought of the frozen meal on the Meridian's table, the untouched cargo, the crew that had vanished without any sign of struggle. The Meridian's crew, I said. They're not gone, are they? They've been changed. Eli's expression darkened, and I saw the answer before he spoke it. They found one of the old signal relays, he said, something the Hollow still uses to reach outward, even after all these years of containment. It doesn't happen often anymore. Most of the relays have been destroyed or disabled. But a few remain, hidden among the wreckage out there, and any crew unlucky enough to activate one becomes a doorway. A doorway to what? Owen asked, though his voice already carried the answer he feared. To more of itself, Eli said quietly. It doesn't need to travel through space the way a ship does. It only needs a connection, a signal, a single open channel between one mind and another. That's why this territory has stayed sealed for so long. Not because we are hiding something shameful, but because opening even one small door could let something out that the rest of the galaxy has no way to fight. So the crew of the Meridian, Kessler said slowly, they're still alive somewhere, just not themselves anymore. Eli nodded grimly. They are still moving, still breathing, still speaking in voices that sound almost right if you don't listen too closely. But whatever made them who they were before, whatever made them a crew instead of simply a collection of bodies sharing a ship, that part of them is gone now, folded into something patient and quiet that has been waiting a very long time for a chance to reach further than these old relays allow. Can they be saved? I asked, though some part of me already feared the answer. Eli's silence lasted long enough that I understood before he even spoke again. Not by anything I have, not yet. My people have spent generations trying to find a way to reverse what the Hollow does, and every attempt so far has failed. The kindest thing I can offer them now is containment, keeping them from spreading what happened to them any further than it already has. Kessler's face had gone pale. And our ship? Priya's still connected to our communications array. Eli's eyes snapped toward the nearest screen, where a faint signal had begun pulsing steadily among the wreckage outside, growing brighter with every passing second. It already knows you're here, he said. The moment your ship crossed into this system, it would have felt the new connection, the same way it felt the Meridian's crew when they stumbled onto that relay. We don't have much time before it tries to reach you the same way. How do we stop it? I asked, my pulse hammering in my ears. Eli moved quickly toward a locked cabinet along the far wall, pulling free a compact device that looked almost like a beacon, its surface covered in old, careful modifications. We can't stop it, he said. Not completely, not yet, but we can disrupt the connection before it fully forms. Buy your ship enough time to cut off every outward channel and get clear of the territory before the Hollow finishes reaching through. And if we don't move fast enough? Owen asked. Eli looked at each of us in turn, his tired eyes carrying the weight of every year he had spent alone out here, holding a line that most of the galaxy didn't even believe existed. Then your crew ends up just like the Meridians, he said, present but no longer entirely yourselves. Alarm began sounding softly from one of the consoles, and Eli's expression hardened into something I hadn't seen from him yet. Not fear, determination. How long do we have? Kessler asked. Eli's eyes flicked briefly toward the readout, calculating. Minutes. Perhaps less. It moves faster once it senses something new to reach for, and right now, your ship is the newest thing it has felt in a very long time. Then let's not waste the minutes we have, I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. We need to move, Eli said. Now. We ran back through the station's corridors, Eli leading the way with the small device clutched tightly in his hand. The lights along the walls flickered as we passed, some dimming entirely, others surging bright enough to hurt my eyes, as if the station itself was reacting to something moving through its systems. Priya, Kessler shouted into his comm, the moment we were close enough to the docking corridor for a signal to reach the ship. Cut every outward channel now, all of them, communications, sensors, everything that isn't life support. There was a pause, static crackling faintly. Captain, if I cut sensors, we'll be flying blind. Do it anyway, Kessler said. Trust me. Another pause, longer this time, and I could hear the fear creeping into Priya's voice even through the static. Cutting channels now. Halfway down the corridor, one of the wall panels beside us flickered violently, and for just a moment, the screen embedded within it showed a face I did not recognize, mouth moving as though speaking words with no sound behind them, eyes wide and searching, as if looking for someone on the other side of the glass. Owen froze beside me, his breath catching audibly through the comm. "Don't look at it," Eli said sharply, not slowing his pace. "It wants you to look. Looking gives it something to hold on to." I forced my eyes forward, my heart pounding so hard I thought the others must be able to hear it over the comm. We reached the docking corridor just as the station's lights failed completely, plunging us into a darkness broken only by the narrow beams of our suit lights and the faint glow of Eli's device. Somewhere behind us, deep within the station, I heard something that I can only describe as a whisper, though it carried no words I understood, just a low, patient hum that seemed to vibrate through the metal floor beneath my feet. "It's trying to find a way through," Eli said, his voice tight. "The relay near this station is old, but it's not fully dead. I need to reach it before the connection fully forms." "Reach it how?" I asked. "It sounds like it's everywhere." "It's not everywhere," Eli said. "Not yet. It needs a clear path, an open channel between itself and whatever it's trying to reach. If I can disrupt the relay before that channel fully opens, it loses its foothold here, at least for now." "And if you can't?" Owen asked. Eli didn't answer, and the silence told me everything I needed to know. We reached the airlock leading back to the Halcyon Drift, and Kessler wasted no time cycling it open, ushering Owen and me through first. I turned back, expecting Eli to follow, but he remained standing in the corridor, his eyes fixed on something further down the darkened hallway. "Eli, come on," I said. "We need to go." Behind us, a section of the corridor wall groaned and flexed inward slightly, metal straining, as though something on the far side were pressing against it, testing its strength. Owen stumbled back a step, nearly losing his footing. "It's not just in the systems anymore," he said, his voice rising with panic. "It's in the station itself. The whole structure is threaded with old cabling," Eli said, pulling us onward down a side passage away from the buckling wall. "It can push against certain systems if it grows desperate enough, but it cannot break through solid bulkhead. Not yet. We still have time, but not much of it. The relay is in the lower section of the station," he continued. "If I don't disrupt it now, it'll finish opening a channel straight into your ship's last active systems, and no distance will save you once that happens. Then we'll help you," Kessler said. "We're not leaving you here." "What is that device exactly?" I asked, nodding toward the small beacon still clutched in his hand. "A disruptor," Eli said, "built from old technology my ancestors salvaged generations ago, designed specifically to interrupt the kind of signal the Hollow relies on to open a channel. It won't destroy it. Nothing we have built so far can do that. But it can force it back into dormancy at this particular relay, at least for a while, long enough for your ship to get clear and for me to properly seal what's left of this station afterward." "How long is a while?" Kessler asked. "Months if I am careful," Eli said. "Sometimes years. It depends on how much energy it managed to gather before I reach it." Eli shook his head firmly. "Your ship needs a pilot who can get you clear the moment I disrupt the connection. If I fail, you need to already be moving. That has to be Priya. It cannot be any of you standing here arguing with me." I felt a knot tighten in my chest, understanding exactly what he was asking of us. "You're not doing this alone," I said. Eli looked at me, and for the first time since we had met him, I saw something soften in his tired eyes, something almost like gratitude. "I've done this alone for longer than you've been alive," he said gently. "But if you truly want to help, then get back to your ship, and the moment I signal you, you leave this system without looking back. That is the only help that matters right now." Kessler hesitated, torn between his instinct to never leave someone behind and the clear urgency in Eli's voice. Finally he nodded, though I could see how much the decision cost him. "We'll be ready," Kessler said. "The moment you signal, we move." Eli nodded once, then turned and disappeared back into the darkness of the station, his suit light bobbing further away with every step until it vanished entirely from view. We scrambled back aboard the Halcyon Drift, sealing the airlock behind us just as the docking clamps released with a heavy clunk. Priya met us on the bridge, her face pale, sweat beading along her brow despite the ship's controlled temperature. "Sensors are still down," she said. "I don't know what's happening out there." "Keep them down," Kessler said. "Just keep the engines ready to move the second we get word." We waited, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours, though the ship's clock insisted only minutes had passed. I stared out the viewport at the darkened station, watching for any sign of Eli's light, any hint of what was happening inside those silent, twisting corridors. "Should we send a shuttle back?" Owen asked, unable to sit still, pacing behind Priya's chair. "Just to check?" "He told us not to," Kessler said, though his hands were gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. "If we go back now, all we do is give it 2 open channels to reach for instead of 1. I understood the logic, but understanding it did nothing to ease the sick feeling twisting in my stomach as we sat there, helpless, watching a man we barely knew risk everything so that we could sit safely aboard our ship and simply wait. "There," Owen said suddenly, pointing toward a faint pulse of light near the station's lower section, flickering rapidly, almost like a heartbeat struggling against something trying to still it. "That's not good," Priya whispered. The pulse grew brighter, then dimmer, then brighter again, and I found myself holding my breath, willing it to steady, to hold, to survive whatever it was fighting against deep within that station. Then, without warning, the pulse flared bright white, and the station's remaining lights, the ones we could see through the viewport, went dark all at once. A single comm signal crackled through our speakers, faint and strained, but unmistakably Eli's voice. "Go. Now." Kessler didn't hesitate. "Priya, get us out of here." The Halcyon Drift lurched forward, engines flaring bright, as Priya pushed us away from the station and back through the debris field at a speed that made the whole ship groan under the strain. Wrecked hulls loomed suddenly out of the darkness on every side, forcing Priya into a series of tight, desperate maneuvers that threw us all hard against our restraints. "Watch that hull to starboard," Owen shouted, bracing himself against his console as a massive derelict freighter swung into view far too close for comfort. "I see it," Priya snapped back, banking the ship sharply, the groan of overstressed metal echoing through the corridors around us as we cleared the wreck with barely enough room to spare. I gripped the edge of my console, watching the viewport as the station shrank behind us, its silhouette barely visible against the darkness of the sector, and prayed silently that whatever Eli had unleashed back there would stay contained long enough for us to clear the debris field entirely. "Sensors coming back online," Priya said, her voice shaking. "I'm reading ancestors. I'm reading an energy surge from the station. It's massive." "Keep us moving," Kessler ordered. "Don't slow down until we're clear of this entire sector." I stared at the shrinking station, willing Eli's light to reappear, some sign that he had made it out, that the surge Priya detected was simply the relay failing rather than something far worse. But the darkness behind us remained unbroken, the station swallowed entirely by the black, indistinguishable now from the countless wrecks surrounding it. "We can't just leave him," I said, my voice breaking. "He told us to go," Kessler said, his own voice tight with the same grief I felt building in my chest. He knew exactly what he was doing when he told us that. No one spoke as Priya guided us through the last stretch of the debris field, each of us lost in our own private silence, replaying the sight of that darkened corridor swallowing Eli's light one final time. Owen sat with his head in his hands, and even Kessler, usually so steady under pressure, stared blankly at the console in front of him, his fingers resting motionless against controls he no longer needed to touch. We flew in silence after that, the boundary line finally appearing on our navigation chart once more, glowing red against the black, marking the edge of a territory that had almost cost us everything. As the halcyon drift crossed back over that invisible border, I felt the tension in my chest ease slightly, replaced almost immediately by a deep, aching sadness for a man none of us had known more than an hour, yet who had given everything to make sure we made it home. "Systems are stable," Priya reported eventually, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Whatever that surge was, it isn't following us." Kessler let out a long breath, sinking back into his chair. "Good. Everyone, take a moment. We made it." But even as relief settled over the bridge, I couldn't shake the image of Eli Marsh standing alone in that darkened corridor, choosing to stay behind so that 4 strangers, who had trespassed into his world, could find their way home. "What do we tell the guild?" Owen asked quietly. "About all of this?" I looked back toward the boundary line, now fading behind us as we continued our journey home, and thought of the countless warnings my grandmother had once whispered to me, warnings I had never fully understood until now. "We tell them the truth," I said. "All of it. Because if we don't, someone else is going to cross that line one day, thinking it's just an old story, and they need to know it isn't." The journey back to guild territory took 11 days, and every one of them felt heavier than the last. None of us spoke much during that stretch, each of us lost in our own thoughts, replaying the same handful of hours over and over, searching for some detail we might have missed, some choice we could have made differently. Priya spent most of her time reviewing the data we had copied from the Meridian and from the station itself, carefully organizing it into something coherent enough to present to the Guild Council. Owen kept mostly to himself, though I caught him more than once standing at the viewport, staring back toward the direction we had come from, as if some part of him expected to see a signal chasing after us through the dark. I found myself thinking about Eli Marsh more than anyone else, a man who knew how many years alone in that station, carving marks into a wall to track the passage of days that most of us would have found unbearable after only a few months. A man who had given up any chance of a normal life, any chance of returning to whatever remained of his people beyond that sealed border, all so that a mistake made generations before he was born would never spread beyond the line his ancestors had drawn. "Do you think he made it?" I asked Kessler one evening as we sat together on the bridge while the rest of the crew slept. Kessler was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead of us. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to believe he did. But I also understand that some choices don't leave room for survival, and Eli seemed like someone who understood that better than any of us." One night, unable to sleep, I found Priya still awake in the small galley, staring at nothing in particular, a cold cup of tea forgotten in front of her. "Can't sleep either?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that face on the wall panel," she admitted. "The one none of us were supposed to look at." "You saw it too?" She nodded slowly. "Just for a second." "Long enough." We sat together in silence for a while, 2 people who had seen something neither of us fully understood, comforted only by the fact that the other had seen it as well, and neither of us had to carry the memory entirely alone. "He didn't have to help us," I said. "We crossed his line. We put his entire world at risk just by being there." "Maybe that's exactly why he helped us," Kessler said, "because he understood better than anyone what it costs when curiosity outweighs caution. Maybe he didn't want us to become another cautionary tale in someone else's story." I thought about that for a long time after Kessler retired to his quarters, staring out at the endless field of stars, wondering how many other travelers over the centuries had crossed that same boundary, and how many of them had been lucky enough to meet someone like Eli Marsh instead of whatever waited for those who found the wrong relay first. When we finally reached guild territory, the reaction to our report was exactly what I had feared. The council listened politely, their expressions carefully neutral, but I could see the doubt behind their eyes long before any of them spoke a word. "You are asking us to believe," said Councillor Faro Idrisi, an older representative with sharp eyes and a reputation for skepticism, "that an entire species, we have long assumed extinct, is not only alive, but has spent over a century single-handedly containing some kind of information-based entity, capable of consuming entire crews without a trace of violence. "I'm not asking you to believe anything," Kessler said evenly. "I'm presenting you with recordings, logs, and first-hand testimony collected during our expedition. What you choose to do with that is entirely up to this council." Pharaoh exchanged a glance with the other counselors seated around the table, their skepticism plain on every face. "Captain Kessler, with respect, stories of ghosts and monsters guarding forbidden territories are as old as space travel itself. Every sector has its legends. It would not be the first time a crew mistook malfunctioning equipment and unfamiliar wreckage for something far more dramatic." I felt anger rising in my chest, but before I could speak, Priya stepped forward, placing a small data drive on the table in front of the council. "Then let the recordings speak for themselves," she said. She played the footage we had captured, the looping warning message from the Meridian's communications room, the carved marks along the station's walls, and finally, the recording of Eli Marsh's voice, calm and steady, explaining exactly what his people had sacrificed to keep the rest of the galaxy safe. The room fell silent as his words filled the chamber, and I watched the counselors' expressions shift, slowly, from skepticism to something far more uncertain. When the recording ended, Pharaoh sat back in his chair, his earlier confidence noticeably shaken. "If this is genuine," he said quietly, "then we are dealing with something far more significant than a simple missing freighter investigation." "It's genuine," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I stood in that station. I heard that alarm. I watched a man choose to stay behind so that 4 strangers who had no business being there could make it home safely. If this council doesn't take that seriously, then we are failing every crew that might cross that line in the future, thinking it's nothing more than an old story." The council remained silent for a long moment before Pharaoh finally spoke again. "We will need to verify this data thoroughly before any formal action is taken, but I will personally recommend that the boundary markers around that sector be reinforced, and that all guild vessels receive updated warnings regarding the risks involved." It wasn't the dramatic response I had hoped for, some grand effort to reach out, to offer help, to acknowledge what Eli and his people had sacrificed. But it was something, a small step toward taking the warnings seriously rather than dismissing them as legend, and for now, that had to be enough. After the council session ended, Pharaoh approached me quietly in the corridor outside the chamber, his earlier skepticism replaced by something closer to genuine curiosity. "You truly believe he is still out there," he said, not quite a question. "Alone." "I have to believe it," I told him, "because the alternative means he gave everything he had for 4 strangers who accidentally wandered into his life for less than a day and got nothing in return, not even the chance for anyone to remember him properly." Pharaoh studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then let us make certain he is remembered properly, whatever the truth turns out to be." It was a small promise, quietly made, but it was the first time since our return that I felt as though someone outside our crew truly understood the weight of what we had witnessed. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Kessler took on new contracts, careful this time to steer well clear of any territory bordering that forbidden line. Priya buried herself in her work, occasionally mentioning that she had submitted a formal proposal to the Guild's historical archive, requesting that a permanent record be kept of everything we had witnessed, so that future generations would understand exactly why that boundary existed. Owen, surprisingly, was the one who changed the most. Where he had once been the most eager among us, to seek out valuable salvage regardless of risk, he grew noticeably more cautious in the months after our return, often the first to suggest turning back from an assignment that carried even a hint of unnecessary danger. "You've gone soft," I teased him once, though there was no real judgment behind the words. "Maybe," he admitted, "or maybe I finally understand that not every mystery is worth the cost of solving it." As for me, I found myself returning again and again to the memory of Eli Marsh, standing in that darkened corridor, choosing to disappear into danger rather than let us share the risk with him. I thought about my grandmother's old warnings, the way her voice used to lower whenever she spoke of that forbidden territory, and I finally understood the truth behind those stories in a way she had probably always known but never had the words to fully explain. Humanity had not vanished from the galaxy out of weakness, nor had they retreated in shame or defeat. They had chosen isolation as an act of sacrifice, sealing themselves away from everything they had once been part of, all so that the rest of us could continue living without ever needing to understand the true cost of that protection. Nearly a year after our expedition, I received a message through an old guild relay station, one so far removed from any populated system that receiving any transmission at all felt almost impossible. The message was brief, encoded in a way that took our system several attempts to properly translate, but when it finally resolved into readable text, I felt my breath catch in my throat. To the crew of the Halcyon Drift, the relay has been fully disrupted, and the connection you were worried about no longer poses a risk to your territory. I wanted you to know that your choice to trust me, rather than abandon me, mattered more than you probably realize. Stay on your side of the line. Tell others to do the same. And know that whatever legends you may have heard about this place, the truth is far simpler than any of them. We are not monsters here. We are simply doing what needs to be done, quietly, so that none of you ever have to. There was no name attached to the message, but I didn't need one. I knew exactly who had sent it, and somewhere out beyond that forbidden boundary, carved into the silence of a sector most of the galaxy still feared to approach, I liked to imagine him standing at that same station, watching over a line he had chosen to protect with everything he had, waiting patiently for a threat that might never come again, or might return tomorrow, ready either way to stand between it and the rest of us. Years later, I still keep a copy of that final message stored on a small personal drive, one I carry with me on every expedition since, a quiet reminder of what I owe to a man I only knew for less than a single day. Sometimes, on long stretches between systems, I play it again, just to hear his voice, steady and calm despite everything he carried, and I find myself wondering how many other travelers over the centuries received a message just like it, or how many never got the chance to receive one at all. I also made a point of tracking down the families of the Meridian's crew, a task no one at the guild particularly wanted to take on. It was one of the hardest conversations I have ever had, sitting across from parents and partners and children, trying to explain why their loved ones would never be coming home, without revealing details that might send someone else chasing after that same forbidden line looking for answers that would only get them hurt as well. I told them the truth in the gentlest way I could manage, that their crew had encountered something beyond anyone's ability to reverse, and that continuing to search for them would only risk more lives without any hope of bringing them back. It never felt like enough, but it was the most honest comfort I had to offer, and most of them, through their grief, seemed to understand that I was not hiding anything worse than what I had already shared. Priya eventually left the guild to join the historical archive full-time, dedicating herself to preserving every fragment of data we had gathered, determined that Eli's sacrifice would never be reduced to nothing more than another half-remembered legend. Owen stayed aboard the Halcyon Drift with Kessler and me, though he took to volunteering for outreach missions along the guild's outer borders, quietly warning newer crews away from territories that carried old warnings most of them had never taken seriously before hearing our story firsthand. As for Kessler, he never spoke much about that expedition afterward, though I noticed he kept a small carved piece of station metal on his desk, one of the notched panels we had removed during our escape, worn smooth from years of him running his thumb across its surface whenever his thoughts drifted somewhere far away. I never crossed that boundary again, not out of fear, though fear certainly played its part, but out of respect for what it truly represented. Not a warning meant to keep curious travelers away from treasure, but a promise, quietly kept by people the rest of the galaxy had almost forgotten, standing guard in the dark so that the light on our side of the line could keep burning safely, undisturbed, and free. A few years after our return, the guild asked me to help train a new group of young scouts preparing for their first long-range expeditions. Standing in front of that room full of eager, nervous faces, I recognized so much of myself in them that same hunger to explore, to discover, to chase down whatever mystery lay just beyond the next star system, regardless of the risk involved. There will be lines on your charts, I told them, drawn by people who came before you, warning you away from certain places, for reasons that might not always be explained. I want you to understand something clearly before you ever leave this station. Those lines are not there to stop your curiosity. They are there because someone, somewhere, paid an enormous price to learn why that curiosity needed limits, and they left that line behind so you would never have to pay the same price yourselves. Did you ever cross a line like that? I looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Once, I said, and it cost someone I barely knew everything he had, so that I could stand here today and tell you not to make the same mistake I did. The room fell quiet, and I saw something shift in their expressions, the same slow transformation from doubt to understanding that I had watched happen across the Guild Council's faces months earlier. Whenever I hear new scouts joke about forbidden territories and old ghost stories whispered among the stars, I no longer laugh along the way I once did. Instead, I tell them what I witnessed, carefully, honestly, and I watch their expressions shift the same way the Guild Councils had, from doubt to uncertainty to a quiet kind of respect that no amount of skepticism can fully erase once you have heard the truth for yourself. Because somewhere out there, beyond a line drawn in blood, sacrifice, and quiet resolve, humanity is still standing watch. Not because the galaxy asked them to, not because anyone else could have done it in their place, but because once, long ago, they made a mistake that could have unraveled everything, and rather than let the rest of us pay for that mistake, they chose instead to disappear from history entirely, becoming nothing more than whispers among the stars, so that the rest of us could continue reaching for them without ever knowing the true weight of what they carried alone. And if you ever find yourself drifting too close to that forbidden line, staring at the warning glowing steadily on your navigation chart, I hope you remember this story, and I hope you choose, unlike we once did, to simply turn away. I think often about that withered garden we found deep inside the station, the faded picture of a green field, pinned above rows of soil that would never grow anything again. I like to believe that somewhere, on the other side of that forbidden line, real fields still exist, tended by people who remember what an open sky looks like, living whatever quiet life remains possible for a species that gave up everything beyond their border to protect strangers who will likely never know their names. It is a strange kind of comfort, imagining a world I will never see, built by people I will never properly thank, but it is the comfort I have chosen to carry with me every time I look up at the stars now. Because some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed again, and some silences are not empty at all, but filled with the quiet, unwavering courage of people who chose to be forgotten, so that the rest of the galaxy never had to be afraid.